Take your copy of Scripture and turn to the book of Psalms, Psalms chapter 13. I don't know if many of the quotes that you saw on the screen has been something that you've thought or felt or even said. A lot of them resonate with me. I've said those at different times and in different places. What we're going to deal with today is to answer the question, how do we handle disappointment in life? And I'm not talking about like what we normally call disappointment, where, something just isn't going our way. I'm talking about how do we handle when our life isn't working out the way that we thought it was supposed to? How do we handle when we feel like that God is supposed to be doing something and we don't see him doing something? How do we handle disappointment in life? But more than that, how do we handle disappointment with God? Where we say, God, I've prayed and I've gone to church and I've given money and I've done all these things, but this stuff is happening in my life and I don't like it. What are you going to do about it? Well, as we read in the psalm that we're going to read today, David understands those feelings. In fact, the background to the passage today, David had been anointed as king when he was younger. Time has passed and he's grown. And he's won some battles, he's done some amazing things, and everybody in the country is super excited for him to be king. They're kind of tired of Saul being king, and Saul's kind of tired of David and all the stuff that's happening in his life. So what Saul decides to do is to hire a hit squad. Saul hires some people to assassinate David. And he's actually right now running for his life. That's kind of tough, don't you think? God said, you're going to be king. God said, I've chosen you to be king. And then God said, you're going to have to wait. And now you have people that are actively seeking to take your life. You can imagine David had some questions. You can imagine David had some thoughts and some feelings. And I want you to hear what David does to come to God to deal with the disappointment in his life. Look in Psalm chapter 13, verse 1. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all the day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my adversaries will rejoice when I am shaken. But I have trusted in your loving kindness. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. How do we deal with disappointment? Well, first we have to answer a question. Why does disappointment impact us so deeply? Why is it so deep? Why is it so difficult? Well, because we're not just talking about simple things like I didn't get the parking space that I wanted, or somebody fixed green beans and I wanted something else. Those are disappointing, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these soul-crushing, life-altering moments. Something happens, and it changes everything. The reason disappointment is so difficult is because there is real, lasting pain. And it has its own gravitational pull. We just feel pulled into this mess. And so some tragedy happens, there's all this mess that we're dealing with, and we're just being bombarded in every direction by pain, and we don't know what to do. That's why it impacts us so deeply, because it hurts. Now, I've had many moments in my life that I would describe in that way, but there's one that stands out. It's that moment where I felt this pull. It was kind of like being caught in a riptide. I was just getting sucked in to this disappointment. 7 months after my mom died, my mom and dad both died in the same year. He died first, she died second. It was 7 months after that. I was walking out of a hospital room, and I had forgotten That was the room that she was in before she died. I walked out of the room, and I noticed that I started to feel kind of weird. My heart was racing, and the next thing I know, I was in a full-blown panic attack. And I was sitting in my car, and all of a sudden, this pain begins to settle into my mind. I am alone. I have no parents. I'm an orphan. There's no more holidays, no more birthdays, no more phone calls. I can't call to get advice. And in that moment, I felt myself slipping, just being dragged into this. The very first thing was, why, God? Why? Why did this have to happen now? And why did it have to happen to me? And why is this happening? It hurts. See, here's the thing. Disappointment is attached to some very deep stuff. Sometimes it's grief. We've lost someone, and we are broken over that loss, and we want answers. And then we get lost in the shuffle of all the mess of our life. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's something else. But here's the thing. Why does disappointment impact us so deeply? Because it hurts. And another reason that it impacts us so deeply is because it shakes our confidence in God. If you've ever had one of those moments, it's really difficult as you're being pulled into that and you're experiencing the pull of that to not begin to say, God, where are you? It shakes our confidence in who God is, and we start to say things like, well, maybe God's not good. Or maybe God's just not good to me. Maybe God's not loving and kind, or maybe he's just not loving and kind to me. Fundamentally shakes our confidence in God. So the reason that it's so difficult is that it causes very deep wounds. It comes from places of pain. It shakes our confidence of God. And here's the thing, it seeps into every area of our life. Wouldn't it be great when we have these moments of trials and troubles if they would stay contained to the one thing? But it doesn't. Grief, anger, trauma, sin, shame. That first devastating blow doesn't stay there. It seeps into everything. And suddenly it takes everything and turns everything bad. Causes deep wounds. It shakes our confidence in God. And so we have to figure out what will break us out of this disappointment. Does God want us to live in disappointment for the rest of our lives? Does God want us to live in anger or fear or grief or shame for the rest of our lives? And the answer is no. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I want to say this because it's important to see. Sometimes when we read the book of Psalms, we forget that this is an actual person with actual problems. I gave you the context of what was happening in David's life, but it's easy for us to read the psalm and think, well, he had a problem, he prayed about it, and he felt better. And I don't know about you, but that's not great advice. Because I've tried it. And I've prayed that prayer, and I've prayed it multiple times. What you need to understand is this is not like God saying, okay, feel bad, pray, feel better. This is an overview of God's work in someone's life. These things are true, but we need to work them, we need to live them, and we need to trust them. So, how do we get out of disappointment when this tragedy has happened, this pain is there, we're being pulled into all these things? How do we get out of that? Well, the first thing he tells us to do is to pour our heart out to God. Look at verses 1 and 2. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all the day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? I don't know if this makes you uncomfortable or not, but for a lot of years of my life, when I would read the Psalms, I would get really uncomfortable for David. He would say things like this, and in my heart, I'd be like, ooh, David, you probably shouldn't talk to God like that. Ooh, that's a little much, man. And it wasn't until I came to the understanding that David had that God is big enough to handle our hurt and pain. God is big enough to handle our questions. God's even big enough to handle our anger. I don't know where this started where we say you can't question God. And I've heard that all my life. You can't question God. David just did. See, the reality is we need to understand God is big enough for us to pour our heart out to him, and he doesn't get his feelings hurt. When we come to God and say, God, I don't like what's happening in my life, God doesn't sit in heaven and clutch his pearls and go, oh, dear me, whatever shall I do? They disagree. Or if we say, God, I don't like what's happening in my life. This is unfair. You're being unfair. Where God goes, oh, you've just hurt my personal feelings. Listen, God is big enough. God is big enough to love you in the light of all the things that you're feeling. And here's what he says, pour your heart out to me. So that's what David does, and that's what we should do. Now, one of the things you're going to see in these two verses is David is talking a lot in his feelings. When you read this, you probably should put at the beginning of this, I feel. I feel. And there's nothing wrong with feelings. We're going to unpack that more in just a second, but here's one of the things that we need to see. Our inner moron loves to take our feelings and try to make them facts. See, there's nothing wrong with feeling things. We just need to recognize that sometimes the things that we feel aren't fact. So let's look at that. What's the first thing he says? I feel like you're not listening to me. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? You ever experienced that? Where you're praying and you're calling out and you're seeking and you feel like your prayers are hitting the ceiling and you say, God, why aren't you listening to me? I feel like you're not listening to me. That's a feeling. What's the fact? The fact is God never stops listening. In fact, as we are screaming at him for not listening, the Holy Spirit is taking all the stuff and junk in our life that we can't figure out and pray for ourselves. He's praying for us. And Jesus is standing at the right hand of the Father praying for us. So here's the deal. I feel like you're not listening. Okay. It's totally okay to feel that. But we have to come back with facts. Is that true? No, it's not. But our inner moron loves to take that feeling and push it as a fact so that we won't talk to our Father. And see, one of the difficulties that we have with our feelings is our feelings don't always give us the right information. And most of the time what's happening when our feelings are screaming at us, they are suffocating God's voice in our life. As God is trying to speak in the still small voice, we have our feelings going, I'm angry, I'm scared. And that's all we can hear. So we need to understand that we need to pour our heart out to God. We can tell God how we feel, and as we tell God how we feel, it makes our feelings not be facts. He says, it feels like you've totally ghosted me. How long will you hide your face? Can you hear what David is saying? Have you ever felt this? He's basically saying, God, where are you? I feel like you're gone. Like I'm calling, man, and you're not picking up the phone. I'm texting and I see you leaving me on read. Like, what are you doing here, man? You're just totally ghosting me. Where are you? That's a feeling. I get that. I get feeling that way, but is that a fact? Is that a fact that God is hiding from you? Is it a fact that God has walked away from you? No, it's not a fact. Here is the fact. God is where he has always been, right here with you. God will never leave you. God will never forsake you. God will never walk away from you. That is fact. But our feeling. Here's where we have to deal with our feelings. And I'll be honest with you, we choose two ways to deal with our feelings, and neither one of them are good. The first way that we choose to deal with our feelings is ignore them and pretend that we don't have them. And so we become a robot. I have no feelings. Feelings do not compute. So we just pretend. I have no feelings about anything. You may have feelings. I don't have feelings. And so there is no such thing as feelings. And I'm just going to pretend like nothing hurts my feelings. But that's the problem. Like even in that saying, nothing hurts my feelings. So if you don't have feelings, how do you have something to hurt? So we do the robot thing. Or we come on the other side and we feel all the feelings. We are controlled by our feelings. Whatever feeling we have at the moment, that's the truth until our feelings change. And so I could be supremely angry right now, and 5 minutes later, I'm supremely happy, and all the feelings are true, and they're all equal, and they're all valid, and I feel it all. Think about how terrible that is to live. We have to bring truth to our feelings. It's a great illustration I like to use when I'm talking about this with people, and it's this. You ever been home alone? All the doors locked, all the windows locked, by yourself. You know you're safe. And then you hear a noise in the other room. And what's the feeling that you feel? Absolute fear. Somebody's in the house. And what do? You check the doors, you check the windows, you look under the bed. There's no monster under the bed. There's no intruder in the closet. But does the feeling go away? No. You brought facts to your feeling, but your feeling didn't change. We have to deal in reality with our feelings. He says, I feel sad and overwhelmed all the time. How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all the day? This is so sad because, man, I have lived this, and maybe you have too. Here's what he's saying. I have done everything that I can do to figure out what is going on in my life and try to solve the problem in my life, and I can't. And I can't solve it, and because I can't solve it, I'm sad and I'm overwhelmed all the time. I love, he says, I've taken counsel with myself. That's the dumbest thing that we could do. There's a problem. Who are you going to call? Me. Who made the problem? Me. And so we're sad and we're overwhelmed. As I think about how to illustrate this, it reminds me of something from when I was a kid. There was TV shows on all the time, and they would have like variety time, and people would come on and they'd show their talent. And I don't know if this is really a talent, but people would do it. They would come on and spin plates. You ever seen that? Every time that somebody came on and I saw the poles and I knew the plates were coming out, my anxiety would go through the roof. If you've never seen it, I'll give you a little description of it. A guy comes out, and he has all these different leveled poles and heights and space, and he puts a plate on the top, and he starts spinning it really, really, really fast. And then he goes to another and starts spinning that. But while he's spinning this one, guess what? That one's slowing down. So he has to run back and spin that one. And now he's spinning another one, and he's spinning over here. And all of a sudden, you're spinning and spinning and spinning all the plates and trying to keep them going. And ultimately, what happens? They all come crashing down. I don't care how great they are. And some guys could go longer than other guys, and somebody could do more plates than other people, but in the end, it all ended the same way. And here's what David is saying. I can't keep all the plates spinning. You ever felt that way? I can't keep all the plates spinning. Here's what he's saying to God. God, I can't do this anymore. Now, I know that sounds like a very defeatist attitude, but actually this is on the way to some help. See, here's the thing. There's a little word in there that we need to see and understand that shouldn't be in there. I can't do this. You're right. You can't keep the plate spinning. No matter how good you are, no matter how long you can last, maybe you can do it better than others, maybe you have more plates on the thing, but you can't keep them spinning. But here's the problem, because we can't keep it spinning, we think nobody can keep it spinning. And that's not the truth. That's a feeling, but here's the fact. We need to trust our life to the God who has an entire universe that we don't even know how big it is, spinning. The billions, trillions, quadrillions of stars that are out there spinning through the universe, and he knows every one of them. He knows their name. He knows exactly where they are. They never run into each other. He got it. All the planets are exactly where they need to be, spinning exactly the way that they should. He's got it. Every bee is buzzing exactly where it's supposed to be. Every blade of grass is growing exactly the way it's supposed to be. The earth is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. He's got it. And on top of that, he has time and energy to know you and take care of you. But I feel like I can't keep this spinning. Good. Stop. Now here, ultimately, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, is what sums up why David is having trouble and why he's sliding into disappointment. He says, I feel like people are going to look at me like a failure and call me a fool. How long will my enemies be above me? Now, think about this for a second. God comes through the prophet Samuel and says, I'm choosing you as my king. You get anointed as king. You go out and win some battles and have all this stuff. Don't you think that he's told people, God's chosen me as king? Look at what I'm doing. Look at all this. And now his life is threatened. And his first thought is this: what are people going to think? Aren't we funny? That we care more about what people think than what God has said. God said, you're going to be king. God said, I've chosen you as king. God said, you are my chosen one, and I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to provide for you. And yet, here's what he's concerned about. What if old guy over here thinks I'm a failure? How am I going to live? What am I going to do? I feel. What's the fact? Here's what God has said. Now, I really love the Psalms for a lot of reasons. I hope you read in the Psalms a lot. They're really great. One of the things that I love about the Psalms is you see people just being real and raw and open. Now, I want you to see that there's not a verse in between verse 2 and verse 3. There's not a verse that said, and David poured his heart out to God, and God struck him dead. And David questioned God, and God brought a plague upon his house. Does it say that in your translation? Because I don't see it in mine. What does that mean? It means that God's okay with this. In fact, God is so okay with this, he put it in the Bible. The reason that we stay in disappointment for too long is because we're unwilling to pour our heart out to God. We're unwilling to come to God and say, God, I'm angry, and I'm angry at you. God, I'm mad. I am upset. I am broken. I am scared. I am all these things. See, one of the things you need to see all over the Bible is there are people who questioned, there are people who cried, there are people who shouted, there are people who pleaded, there are people who begged because they didn't get it. And God understands that. See, here's the reality that we don't want to face. If God took everybody out of the Bible who ever questioned him, there would be nobody in the Bible, including Jesus. Remember the quote? My God, why have you forsaken me? There's a little break between verse 2 and verse 3. It's almost as if David stops and takes a deep breath. To flush out all of those feelings so he can actually hear from God. See, sometimes I think we don't hear from God and don't really deal in prayer the way that we should because we don't flush out all these things that we're thinking and feeling before that. But here's what he does. He flushes that out and he says a prayer. Look at verses 3 and 4. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my adversaries will rejoice when I am shaken. He says, I need to pray. I need to pray my way through this problem. He basically comes and says, where else am I going to go? You know, this kind of harkens back to that thing where he's like, you know, I've done all I can do and I've tried so hard and I can't keep the plate spinning. Here's what happens to many of us, and it's silly. Something happens in our life, and instead of going to God, we go to everybody else. We get on the phone. Hey, did you hear what happened? Well, let me tell you what happened. And here's all the facts about what happened. What do you think? What's your opinion about it? Oh, that's your opinion? Okay, we need to call 12 more people and see what they think. And let's call all these people and so we can get all the facts and we can get all the opinions and we can all agree. And here's the problem. I don't want to be mean, but here's the reality. Nobody that you're talking to can do anything for you. They can agree, they can disagree, or they can say, man, that stinks. Hate that for you. But we run around and we're trying to get all the opinions and all the things, and we want to feel that we're doing something, and the reality is we're not going to the one that can really do something. So we pray. Here's what he says. Consider and answer me. Now your translation may say, look, it's the same thing. He's basically saying, God, I need you to put your eyes on me right now. I need you to put your eyes on me right now, and I need you to answer me. This isn't a threat. This isn't a demand. It's a heartfelt plea. God, this is what I need. I don't need anybody else's opinion. I don't need anybody else's approval. I don't need anybody else's help. I need you. Now here's what's powerful. He comes to God and he says, God, I need you to hear me. And one verse before this, what did he say? I feel like you're not listening. What a change. What a change from you're not listening to here I am again. I'm coming and I'm asking. Listen, too many of us, and myself included, we stop asking way too early. See, we look at this and think, oh, well, David prayed and God answered and everything changed. It was all in a moment. No, this was a period of time. And so we make some crazy request. God, I want you to do this right now at this time and this way, and it doesn't happen. Well, I'm not praying anymore. Don't stop asking. Don't stop asking. I don't know who originally came up with this quote, someone did, and everybody has attributed themselves to it. It's a wonderful quote. Here's what it is. When you can't trace God's hand, trust his heart. David says, look, I don't see you, I don't feel you, I don't think you're hearing me, but here I am again. I trust you because I know you and I'm coming to you. Look at me, hear me, answer me. Listen, it's not if you're going to have disappointment. It's not if you're going to have trouble. It's not if you're going to have feelings and pain. It's just when. And when that when happens, you need to be like David, look at me, hear me, answer me. And as he's approaching God and calling out to God and crying out to God, he has this beautiful other part of the prayer that comes and he says, enlighten my eyes. Give light and life to my eyes. What he's saying is this, God, give me perspective. I'm not seeing things clearly. Clearly I'm not seeing it clearly. Help me to see the reality of what's happening here. David was humble enough to recognize that he didn't know everything. He didn't have all the facts. You ever had a moment where you just were completely sure that something was the way that it was, and then God gives you some other facts down the road, and you were like, well, I was totally wrong? You ever had that? I sure have. But why don't we have the humility more to come to God and say, God, I don't have all the facts. You do. Help me to see. See, David realized, and he even says it again here, one of the struggles that he has, he's so worried about what people are going to think about him. He even says it again, don't let my enemies have victory over me. He's asking for God to remove the scales from his eyes. And we all have them. And the scales can be different things at different times. Maybe the scale that's covering your eyes from seeing God's work and hearing God's voice is the scale of grief. That everything that you hear and everything that you get is filtered through grief. And so you're just constantly like, this is awful and sad and terrible. Well, yeah, things are bad, but they're not that bad. Maybe you're filtering it through anger or fear or sin or shame. A great prayer that we all should be asking God is this: God, take the scales off my eyes and then let me see. Let me see what's really happening here. Let me see what you're really doing here. And there's another break. It's as if David takes another deep breath in. That kind of soul cleansing, soul refreshing breath that comes from prayer. David has recognized that he needs to fix his eyes on Jesus. I mean, ultimately that's what he's saying when he says, enlighten my eyes, help me to put my eyes on the right thing. And so many of us put our eyes on the wrong thing. We look at our problem and we look at our diagnosis or we look at whatever's going on and we see it and we see all the damage and the pain, and it's so huge and our God is so small. But when we turn our eyes on Jesus, it changes everything. It's just like the old hymn says, turn your eyes on Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Do you catch the truth of what he's saying there? When we fix our eyes on Jesus and we see him for who he is, we recognize that he is greater than anything in our life. Now it's amazing, his next phrase, he says, I trust you. But I have trusted your loving kindness. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Now, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes when I read the Psalms, I get whiplash. Because there's so many emotions happening at the same time, right? The first one is, I'm so angry. Now I'm okay. I'm so sad. I'm at peace. I'm at peace. And again, you need to remember that this isn't like one moment where he's feeling all the feels and then he's completely okay. It's a process. Process of pouring himself out to God and praying to God. And on the other side of that, here's what he says, I trust you. Have you ever asked yourself the question, why should we trust God? If you haven't, you should. David is going to give us 3 reasons that we should trust God. Now, here's the reality. We could sit here and start talking about all the ways that we should trust God, and we'd be here for 25 years, and we still wouldn't have covered even a fraction of the ways that we should trust God and why. But David picks 3 that I think are very important. He says, I trust you because of your loving kindness. Your translation may have mercy. Same thing, same word. He says, I trust you because you're merciful. You know, we talk about mercy all the time, but I don't think we really understand how amazing it is. And I want to tell you something. As a pastor, it is so frustrating for me that I cannot encapsulate for you how great mercy is. I wish I could. And every time I explain it, I leave thinking, that was stupid. Because it's so amazing. But here's the thing. He is merciful. Here's what that means. He never gives us what we deserve. That's what mercy is. God never says, okay, I'm going to pour out all my wrath and all my anger and all my justice on you. I'm going to have mercy. And God, when he approaches us, God's approach to us in every time and every way is love. And that's mercy. He's merciful. David says, I trust you. Why? Because he's a rescuer. He says, I trust in your salvation. The only reason we can trust in salvation is because God is a savior. God is ready, willing, and able to save you. I want to say this because it's important. If you are in trouble, if you are hurting, if you are broken, if you feel this gravitational pull of disappointment in your life, good, because that means you need to be rescued. And what is God good at doing? Rescuing. If you need to be rescued today, there is one here who's ready, willing, and able to rescue you. And so here's what David says. I trust you because I know you can rescue me. And I love that he ends with this one. He says, I trust you because you deal bountifully with us. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but here's what David is saying. I trust you because God, when you put everything in the balance, you have dealt with us in such an amazing way where you have blessed us way more than there's been pain in our life. Now, here's the problem. Again, we don't always look at our blessings. We like to look at our pain. And there's another old hymn that talks about that. You remember the hymn that says, count your blessings and name them one by one? Have you ever tried to do that? It's impossible. And even if you were naming them, we forget all the blessings that we don't call blessings, that we just take for granted. Have you counted all the breaths that you've had today? Every time, if you're like, blessing, blessing, blessing as you're breathing? Nope. Have you thought about all the rain that we've gotten? Or the sunshine? Or the oxygen? See, God has blessed us in innumerable ways, and he's blessed us way more than any pain that we suffer. And here's the reality. God has blessed us in a way that if he'd only blessed us with this, it would be worth it all. God blessed us with Jesus Christ. Jesus died for us. Jesus paid for our sin. Jesus conquered sin, death, hell, and the devil. Jesus rose again on the third day to give us life and forgiveness and freedom. If that's the only thing that God ever gave us, and it's not, it would be worth it all. He says, I trust you because I can't accuse you of being stingy. I can't accuse you of withholding blessing. Now, he says something that I love. He says, because all this is true, I will sing to the Lord. Now, I'm not asking you to burst out in song today. What I am asking is this. David couldn't help but respond to God. And we shouldn't either. We should see these things and hear these things and experience these things and can't help but respond. That's what he's saying. I can't help but respond to God. I can't help but rejoice. Now, you guys know I think crazy things. And one of the things that I have thought before is David okay with this very private stuff being put in the Bible? Like, did God kind of tell him, hey, I'm going to take your journal and all the private thoughts that you're writing, and I'm just going to put it in a book, and people are going to see it for thousands of years? Was David like, awkward? I really think if David was here today, here's what he would tell you. I'm glad it's there. I'm glad it's there because it's a reminder to me that when I'm in those moments and I'm disappointed, I can go back and look and say, God was there. I'm glad it's there because I can share what God has done for me with you, and God can use it to help you. Are you sharing what God has done for you with someone else so it can help them? Respond. How can we respond? Well, there's lots of ways, but here's what I'd like you to think about. I'd like you to pour out your heart today. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you've just poured your heart out to God and flushed out all that stuff so that you can actually hear from him and you can actually talk to him? Or you just keep it pinned up inside and pretend like you're okay? I'd ask you to ask God to remove the scales from your eyes. What is it that's keeping me from seeing reality? What is it that's keeping me from seeing you work? What is it? I'd ask you to tell Jesus, I trust you.